So we started our movement in 2007. We held the first Stolen Sisters Awareness Walk. It was the first walk of its kind in the province. Again, like strictly grassroots. And I guess I should explain what grassroots means to us. So to our movement, grassroots means non-funded, for the people, by the people. And there's many reasons why we've kept it that way. I believe that, when, some organizations, nonprofits are funded, sometimes they might feel they're controlled. They may not be able to say what they want to say or do what they want to do. And just to protect the integrity of why we started this in the first place, we felt that to keep it grassroots, although it's out of pocket, that would protect the integrity. So, it's been 20 years now. But I would say it was probably back in 2009, our movement was approached to host the National Sisters in Spirit Vigils. And I believe the first one we did was in a park just off of White Avenue. And then we continued that for a number of years. And it got to the point where we were having 2 awareness walks a year. And as I mentioned earlier, many of us involved in the movement are family members and survivors, and many of us single parents. And it got to a point where it was just too much, working full time, raising families, and all of these other barriers, right? So eventually we did pass the torch, if you will, to the Institute for the Advancement of Aboriginal Women. That was in 2019, was the last time that we had hosted the Sisters in Spirit Vigil for Edmonton. But it was a few years ago that the community asked us to come back, if you will. So we had last year, we called it a community reunion, like an angelversary, and we hosted the Sisters in Spirit Vigil just on Okisekau Way, which is, for any major city, it's pretty unprecedented. Okisekau, for those of you that don't speak Cree, means angel, and Edmonton was actually the 5th city in Canada to name a street in honor of women that have been victims of violence and families that have been victims of violence. So there's a small group of folks, just like Kate Quinn here. We worked with elders, and we launched that initiative in 2011. I think it was 4 years ago, Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, after a call to action to the city of Edmonton, we had asked the city to declare June 14th, Okisekau Way Day, which they did. And also thanks to Elder Karen McKenzie, Métis elder here in Edmonton. She had challenged the city of Edmonton to have Okisekau Way go from an honorary street name to an actual civic address. And it's now a civic address, so that's a pretty big deal. So let's say, you were staying at the Doubletree Hotel on Okisekau Way and you order skip the dishes. When you see your car coming closer and closer, you're gonna see Okisekau Way. I work for Indigenous Services Canada. Unfortunately, I have not found a way to make this a part of my living. Like as an advocate, I'm working towards that, but I do work for the Government of Canada, but I'm there to decolonize. And it was interesting because I work in a public-facing role. I do treaty card renewals and treaty registration. And I met a young lady. She had come into our office looking to renew her treaty card. And we have to ID everybody. They have to have valid ID to renew their treaty cards. And on her ID, it said Okisekau Way, and that was really, really meaningful to me. So that's kind of the history to our connection to Sisters in Spirit. So the actual Sisters in Spirit Vigils were started by the Native Women's Association of Canada in 2005. Their logo is the grandmother moon, so you might have seen here. You might have seen this, floating around social media, but this is the symbol for their movement. So, it's unfortunate because there were years where they had more funding, and they would send pins and flags like this and balloons and banners, but unfortunately they're no longer able to do that. But we've always appreciated their support and appreciated that they started what they started as well. So we're certainly not the only group, movement, organization that are fighting for justice for our people, but I think over the years, this collective, this collaboration has really just made our voices stronger, and we are not alone. I know we just had the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and it was a few days before the day. I was thinking of my late mother, Lucy. She was a survivor. She never really talked about what happened to her, though, and I remember her talking about going to the Shaw Conference Center and testifying, but again, she didn't really talk about it. And I was thinking, like, I didn't really offer her much support then. Like, we just didn't talk about it. And, obviously I can't go back into time, but, I wish I would have been there more for her, because I know as a survivor, it takes a lot to share your story, especially as a survivor advocate. There is a human cost. So when I was a young adult, I was targeted, groomed, and I was involved in sexual exploitation. And this exploitation happened for quite a few years. I ended up in the United States. There was many occasions where I could have been missing or murdered. And I did testify when the National Inquiry came to Edmonton, and I shared my story. At that time, though, I wasn't ready to go public because I was scared. Like, I guess it wasn't until I started sharing my story that I started to learn about my own story, if that makes any sense. Like, there's so many layers of trauma, starting at a very young age. Like, I used to say when I started sharing my story publicly that I was targeted and groomed at about the age 18, 19. But then as I started kind of going back into those layers, I realized, well, no, I was exposed to pornography as a child, and violence and other awful things. And that was part of the grooming. That's part of what created the mindset for me to be so vulnerable. We also lived in poverty. And at the age of 16, I moved from rural southern Saskatchewan to Edmonton. And coming to Edmonton was like, I felt like I was in New York City. And I was incredibly vulnerable. And I ran with a crew of kids off of 118th Ave, and we were involved in many bad things, but we all had something in common. We came from broken families. And so we kind of looked out for each other, right? And I can't say that I know what happened to everybody from those days, but again, like, sharing my story has helped me learn more about why, what happened to me, and even what happened to my mother. So one thing that I do know about my mother is that when she was a young woman, she was born in Alberta, she ended up in Regina, where she was unfortunately working the streets. And that's actually how she met my dad. My dad was not a sex buyer, but he had drove by her. She was standing there, and he thought, I think this woman might need some help. But they ended up going to a house party, ended up getting married, having 2 kids, divorced. She goes back to Alberta, and I stay with my father in Saskatchewan. Like I said, there's so many layers to this, and we're hearing a lot now about human trafficking. And I'll just share with you, it was over 10 years ago, the late Gloria Niapatang, so the woman that designed that Okisakau Angel Way sign blade. We were at the Alberta Human Rights Awards. We were receiving an award. And at the end of the program, we had the opportunity, the audience had an opportunity to ask 4 top brass RCMP a question. So our question to the RCMP was, do you think there's a connection between domestic sex trafficking and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls? And all 4 of them said no. And I remember we gasped. We could not believe that they could not make the connection. Now they made the connection, but we've known this in our communities forever. This has been happening since contact, right? We just don't call it trafficking, right? We have different language for this type of insidiousness. And I am very grateful to have survived what I survived. My mother shared a story with me before she was too sick to talk. She had told me that when she lived in Vancouver, this would be about probably 15 years ago, she was drinking down in Hastings. We lived in an area called the Skeena Projects. So the Skeena Projects was maybe a 15-minute cab ride from East Hastings. And she had left the bar, and she was waiting for a cab, and this van drove up to her. And what appeared to be a man and a woman offered her a ride home. Now, she's under the influence, didn't have much money, so she accepted the ride. So along their travel, my mom realizes that they're not going where they said they were taking her back home. They were going a different direction. And my mom, like when she drank, she was pretty rank, she was pretty tough. And this woman that was in the passenger seat, she ended up trying to attack her in the back of the van when she was trying to get out of the van. And my mom realized that was actually a man dressed as a woman. And anyway, she was able to fight them off, and she was able to get out of the van. She rolled out of the van, and she survived that. But I know that's just one of many stories that my mom had as well. And it's generational. Like all of us in my family, my sisters, my aunties, like we've all faced near-death situations, right? And I'm just, we started this movement 20 years ago, and we started it with the name the Stolen Sisters Awareness Walk. Now the awareness became action, but I can honestly say that 20 years now has passed and things are getting worse. And I don't know what else we can do. Like, we are exhausted. All of us, right, that are fighting this good fight. We know that racism has a lot to do with it, but there's other things that we don't talk about in our communities enough. And that's things like Indigenous on Indigenous violence, family violence, lateral violence. I've been saying it for the last number of years, like lateral violence is killing us. It isolates us and it pushes us to the edges of our communities, which creates a vulnerability. And that's where the predators prey, right? They know who's vulnerable. They can see it a mile away. When I was a young teenage girl in Edmonton, I had many people preying on me, especially when I was homeless. And I had a social worker once tell me, homeless youth is one of the most vulnerable members of our community. And when I became homeless at age 17, after my mom abandoned me for the second time, I was told to go to the Edmonton Youth Emergency Shelter to at least get a bed and something to eat. So I went there. I took a bus to White Avenue. I walk in there and they said their beds are full. And show me the door. And then one of my friends said, well, you could go to Catholic Social Services. So I went, made an appointment, met with the social worker, and she was nasty. I told her what happened with my mom, what was going on at home, all the violence and the drinking and the parties. And she said to me, what did you do? What did you do to make your mother abandon you here? And then she gave me a food stamp to Safeway, and she showed me the fucking door. And I did not end up in the system. I was too old. I ended up in the sex trade. Because by then, I had already met people that were involved in the sex trade and looking to prey on young, vulnerable girls like me. And I spent many years in a living hell, and I barely made it out of New York City alive. And if I would have died there or went missing there, I would have just been a Jane Doe. They probably would have even misclassed my race, because when I was being sold as an exotic, so South Asian, Latina, Italian, depending on how my hair was styled or what I was wearing, the traffickers would sell me as something different. And I did try to convey that to the National Inquiry when I shared my story, that I believe that the traffickers are specifically preying on our people because of this, right? And they also go where they think the profit is high and their risk is low, because who's gonna care about another missing Indigenous girl or woman or man or boy? And that needs to change, and it is changing. But we have a long fight ahead of us, and we have a lot of healing to do. I feel like I've just scratched the surface of my own healing. But I really I'm so grateful to each and every one of you that came out tonight. I know it's a small group, but it's not about the numbers, right? It's about the community. And each of you represent a segment of our community. And for those of you that are also family members and survivors, there is a whole community standing behind you, standing with you, that we may not have the exact same story, but we understand the pain. We understand it, and we are here to support you, and we are not going to surrender. Why? Because our ancestors would never surrender this type of human rights crisis against our people. We are in an ongoing genocide. The genocide may look different than what you see on the news, what's happening in Gaza, but it is a genocide. It's very pervasive, and it's happening here, and that needs to stop. And we're never going to stop fighting. So I just wanted to, again, thank all of you for coming out tonight and standing with us, and taking the time to be with us tonight. There's other things going on right now in Edmonton. So again, hi, Kananaskambton.